A researcher in all things fairy, Dr Neil Rushton, who has a wonderful blog called Dead But Dreaming, which is just a minefield of fairy information and information about consciousness. And Neil also co-hosts sometimes with Kate Hairgirl Ray on her podcast, Hair in the Hawthorn. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you very much, Claire. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. Yeah, it's really wonderful to have you on because I've been wanting to have you on as a guest for a while because I know you have some really fantastic fairy experiences to share. And something that I'm interested in hearing about is how you got into fairies. Where did it all start?
Where did it all start?
Yeah.
Yes, well, a long time ago when I was a young man. So I'm trained as an archaeologist. I went to the University of Southampton to do a BA and an MA, and then I went to the University of Cambridge to do my PhD. Now, the subject matter that I did the PhD thesis on is nothing to do with with esoteric beings. It was actually a very sort of materialistic look at the outer precincts of English monasteries in the Middle Ages. So that's what I was doing at Cambridge when I was an archaeologist. But I was also working as a field archaeologist. That's been since 1993. Actually, I began as a field archaeologist, so I did that before and throughout the time that I was doing my university degrees. And it was actually when I was at Southampton looking at the archaeology, I just, so what have we got here? Sort of 95, first year of university, I started to get interested in the folklore, most specifically surrounding prehistoric sites, because in the first year I actually specialized in medieval as I went on, but the first year I was very much into prehistoric, especially the Neolithic and Bronze Age periods. And I've suddenly realized when sorry, I have a few books down here that I will regale you with during the course of the podcast, and I read this book. This is
Yes.
by an archaeologist called Leslie Grinsell, The Folklore of Prehistoric Sites in Britain. And it's basically a gazetteer of prehistoric sites in Britain where folklore, a range of folklore attached to these sites. And one of the things he points out in one of his distribution maps and in the gazetteer itself is that many have fairy associations, fairy folklore. And that really, really piqued my interest. Why would that be? What was the relation between prehistoric peoples and their monuments and these fairy entities that I'd only up to then I'd only been peripherally interested in. And so I started attempting while at university to talk about prehistoric sites and integrate the folklore. And I was very quickly warned off doing that. It was not seen as the done thing. Folklore was just, well, it was just folklore. It was not hardcore archaeology. And it was a bit woo-woo, to be honest, especially when you're talking about the fairies. And so that was very disappointing to me. But I can be a bit stubborn, Claire. And so I dug my heels in and I did like independent research. Okay, I won't put this into university essays or theses or whatever. I'm going to go around the country when I get the chance, and I'm going to go and look at these sites, and I'm going to collect the folklore and just make my own gazetteer to sort of complement Leslie Grinsell, not for publication or anything, but just for my own purposes. And sure enough, Grinsell talks in the book. There are about maybe 70 sites in Britain connected with fairy folklore, and I found another probably doubled that. And if if you did that research today, you could probably quadruple it or to make it, 500% even
Yeah.
what it is there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
go on,
And
go on.
just ask why that is. Is it just because the information hadn't been researched at that time?
Yeah, I mean, Grinsl's
Yeah.
book is 1976, remember?
Yeah.
So
Mm,
obviously a lot of folklore has come to light since then, where so you can supplement that. I'm thinking, one of the most recent books, sorry, it's on the shelf behind me, but Rob Wildwood's Magical Britain.
yes.
That's probably the most recent updating of it. So anyway, so I'm at university doing this. I've been warned off looking at the folklore. It just won't get you anywhere. It'll damage your career. It doesn't work. Well, okay. Um, and and I'd also been looking at other books such as Brian Froud and Alan Lee's Fairies, which was a great influence on me before I went to university. There's such beautiful imagery in there. And also Brian Froud's take on the fairies. It was not. It was very much, yeah, they exist, and
Yeah.
I'm kind of trying to represent them as best I can.
Hmm.
So with that in mind, I'm still at Southampton University, and in the summer of 1996, I go along to West Kennet Long Barrow, which is a Neolithic burial chamber. It would have been used for other things apart from burials in Wiltshire, about 100 foot long, as most long barrows are, but with a chamber, stone-built chamber in the front where the burials were found when it was excavated in the 1950s. And I'd been there before. Very special site. Many people listening to this will know West Kennet Long Barrow. And it at the time I just got into meditation to just to try and help sort of the stresses and strains of university life, right? The meditation's a good thing. And I decided, for whatever reason, to meditate in West Kennet Long Barrow. And as you go into the chamber, there are 4 side chambers, 2 on each side, where the burials were found. And then there's an end chamber lined with these massive sarsen stones. It's a magnificent monument. And there were no burials found in that end chamber. So I set myself up as the sun, well, before twilight, before sunset, I should say, and in the end chamber, and started meditating. And within about 20 minutes, I'm in very relaxed meditative state. And along the chamber, the, 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 the passageway up to the chamber, I see a small humanoid figure which walks along towards me to the chamber. Now that humanoid figure was about a foot high, maybe a little bit more, and was very reminiscent of a Brian Froud type fairy. With the little hat, archaic clothing,
Hmm.
not properly human, humanoid, but not properly human.
Hmm.
And so for about between 30 seconds and a minute, I watched it walk up towards me. It cocked its head, looked at me,
Yeah.
didn't say anything,
Hmm.
and then turned around, walked back down the passageway, and disappeared into one of the side chambers. I don't mean it flashed out of existence. I mean it just walked into one of the side chambers.
Mm.
Now, so you're in a 5,500-year-old burial chamber, and some entity comes comes towards you, looks at you. There was no sound in this, by the way.
Right.
Now, under normal circumstances, you might think, well, and lots of people have asked me when I've told them this story, is that, weren't you terrified? And
Mm.
there was no fear whatsoever, probably because I was in a meditative state. And I hasten to add that I was definitely not asleep. I was in that
Mm.
relaxed meditative state that allowed me just to accept the experience as it happened.
Mm. And you had your eyes open?
Yeah, yeah, eyes
Yeah.
open. At that
Yeah.
time, I always meditated with
Hmm.
eyes open. I used to try and focus on things, that type of meditation.
Hmm.
And so I allow that to happen, and I'm right. That's interesting. What's just gone on here? And I managed to sort of break out of that meditation, and of course I went down and checked the side chamber that he appeared to have walked into, and there was nothing there. Um, so that moment in 1996 was the moment that, I've been reading about the folklore. I was very interested in the fairy folklore,
Mm.
but that was the moment where something happened, a gnosis, direct experience of these type of entities that I've been reading about. Now, it's because I'd seen very familiar with Brian Froud's imagery by that time.
Mhm.
Maybe I was predisposed to see whatever that energy was,
Mm.
as a fairy. If I'd been reading about ghosts, I might have seen a ghost apparition. If I'd have been reading about UFOs, abduction scenarios, I might have seen a grey alien. I don't know whether I was predisposed to see that. We'll come back to that later in
Mhm.
something else. We'll talk about that kind of predisposition to seeing whatever energy is there, whatever non-material energy that is manifested within our material reality for whatever reason. And I think the fact that I was in that very relaxed state meant that I was in an altered state of consciousness. And that, again, as you'll know from my writings, I think that's a very important attribute to many, many fairy experiences, that you were in some type of altered state of consciousness. So that was it. That was, right. I know they exist, and I want to find out more about them. And from then on, it was I really intensified my research into the folklore, but then also into the more esoteric side of this, asking basically, what are they, and
Mm.
how do we interact with them, which is a massive question. And I hasten to say I still haven't answered that question, as I don't think anyone else has. And so that so 96, and I didn't start writing the blog until 2016, actually. So it was
Yeah.
only it took till 2016 that I felt able to write and publish about them, about the fairy phenomenon. So that's a very
Yeah.
so go on. That's just a sort of a very summarized version of why I got into the fairies.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much I want to ask about that experience. I mean, it's interesting because we were talking before we came on
Mm,
about 2016 and how myself, I had a shared fairy experience with my mom in 2016. It just, and other people I've spoken to seem to have had some kind of awakening experience in 2016. So there's a couple of things. What do you think happened in 2016 that made you feel able to share that experience?
mm.
And what what do you think was going on at that time around that things were that enabled this information to start to come forward?
Yeah, well, there's quite a lot to unpack there. I mean,
Yeah.
most people will look back to 2016 and think Brexit, Trump, at a geopolitical level. And I think, that obviously those two things were very important in 2016. But I think, just as you've been saying, Claire, I know a lot of people that whose reality changed in 2016. My reality changed in 2016 because that was when I lost a lot of my eyesight, which again we'll talk about in terms of encountering entities. We'll talk about it in a moment, but it's so I'm blind in my left eye, and my right eye has no peripheral vision. It's quite poor eyesight. And that happened in 2016. So 2016 for me was a year of trauma. It was extremely traumatic experience to lose that amount of eyesight. And that was when I had to stop being an archaeologist. I'd worked as an archaeologist up to that time. I had to stop doing that, so I can't drive anymore with this eyesight. And once I got over the initial few months of trauma, that's when I started writing Dead But Dreaming,
Mm.
because I thought, um, yeah, I need to. I've done a shed load of research on this over the year, and no one knows anything about it. So
Mm,
I did think about writing a book, but I thought, no, that's not the way forward at the moment. I was still getting over the eyesight loss and throwing myself into writing a book. No, no, I can't do it. It's too much.
mm,
So I decided to start the blog post, which soon became quite popular. And I very much enjoyed going through, say 3,000, 4,000 word articles. And at that time, I was producing them once a month, and I was
mm,
getting that information out, and it found very cathartic to do that in 2016. So for me, my reality did change very, very obviously in 2016, in that I'd
mm,
stopped doing what I'd been trained for and what I'd done for 23 years, and I started doing something else. And that was very helpful for me in terms of getting over the trauma of losing the eyesight and everything that
mm.
else that entailed. But but I hear so many other people talking about that being the year, as we talked about just before we came on, the whole thing back in 2012, where the Mayan calendar
Mhm.
was supposed to come, the world was supposed to come to an end, or something was supposed to end in 2012, and then a lot of people, after nothing happened, were saying, no, no, you've misinterpreted the Mayan calendar. It's 2016. Now you could say, well, the world didn't come to an end in 2016, but did it? Did reality change in 2016? As far you look back, you think about where we are now, what we've gone through since 2016. The world is a fundamentally different place in
It is
2024 than
hugely,
it was in 2015, on
yeah,
many, many levels, which we won't go into. But I think something shifted, and for me, it was represented in sight loss, starting to write about the fairies in a public format, and going on a new journey in life, for better or worse, at that time. So yeah, 2016 is pivotal year for not just me, I think, in general.
yeah, definitely. And going back in time, because of course in fairy time there is no time.
Hmm.
So
That's
going
right.
back to 1996, often speaking to other people and what I researched and read and what I experienced myself, fairy experiences symbolize some kind of crossroads. Do you feel and the way that this being turned off, kind of veered off
Mm.
in another direction, do you feel that that was symbolizing something, that precursing what was going to happen in 2016 with your eyesight and that change to your career? Or do you not
Mm.
read that into it, or is there a message that you get from that experience other than
Mm.
that?
Possibly. I wouldn't put anything definitive on that. I didn't. The only message I got in 1996 was, oh wow, I've just had
Yeah.
a Gnostic direct experience, and my view of reality will never be the same again. Because you can read as many books, watch as many
Mm,
documentaries, listen to as many people as you like,
mm,
but there will always remain a doubt if you haven't experienced it directly. And as soon as you
yes.
experience it directly, boom, things are different. One thing I will say is, because
Mm,
there's a very famous motif in fairy folklore about the fairies blinding an eye.
yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
so so often, it often starts with someone uses some salve or cream or
Mm,
something on their eye,
mhm,
and suddenly they can see the fairies, and then they'll turn up at some marketplace or something, and the fairy realizes that they're being seen by this person, and will ask the person, which eye can you see me with? They'll say, oh, my left eye, and they'll poke it out. Typical fairy behavior. And so
yeah.
I always thought, what's should was I allowed to see the fairy? But yeah, I don't know. But to counter that, in after the eyesight went, I developed Charles Bonnet syndrome. I don't know. Do you want to talk about that now, or leave that till later?
Yeah, I'm interested in that because it follows on, doesn't it? Because as you're saying, this, what came out of that was, even though your sight was affected, it gave you, also gave you an insight.
Insight. Ah, very good, Claire. I see what
Yeah,
you did there. Yeah.
that's good.
It's so 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 2016. The ice This is early 2016. Um, and um, well, I should explain first. Charles Bonnet syndrome is something that happens or can happen to people who have visual impairment, not total sight loss, but a visual impairment. And it's more common than I had realised. And at the time in 2016, I didn't know it existed. I didn't know anything about this. And so this must have been January 2016, and I'm sitting in my living room of my cottage in Somerset, where I lived at the time. And it's kind of, just the lights are on. It's dark outside, but the lights are on inside. And a number of three fairy type entities turn up on my armchair. This is after let me just get this right so I can explain what happens. There was like in the within my eyesight range in my right eye, there's like a geometric pattern, like a
Yeah.
foggy geometric pattern appearing in the room. And when that
Mm,
happens, you think, oh, it's just my eyesight playing up. And from that geometric pattern, these three characters turn up.
mm,
And again, they're very Brian Frood-like characters, very similar to what I saw in West Kennet Longbarrow. But the difference was that the West Kennet Longbarrow experience, I was looking straight at this little chap, and it seemed very material. It was just like he was a person
mm,
right there. Whereas with the Charles Bonnet syndrome, the first time and subsequent times, there's a peripherality to the experience.
right.
So that I don't seem to be able to look directly at them. If I
Mm,
try to look directly at them, they the geometric pattern will appear and they will disappear. But it's, even though you're not looking, like I'm looking, my famous silver chalice. I'm looking at that peripherally now, and I know it's a silver chalice. You
mm,
know the shape of it. You can see what it's like.
mhm,
But and so I'm looking at them, these characters, in that way. And well, again, I wasn't meditating at that time. It just happened out of the blue, and it didn't last very long. 30 seconds before boom, it's gone. And as I said to you before, losing that amount of eyesight is extremely traumatic. And I
mm,
started asking myself, I'm going insane.
mm,
There's some sort of insanity happening here, and I'm seeing beings that I shouldn't be seeing, even though I'm fully aware of all the fairy folklore and I'm thinking they're fairies. Again,
mm,
am I predisposed to see some sort of energy pattern, or am I genuinely going insane and I just happen to be seeing fairies because I'm going insane? But fortunately, I went to my ophthalmologist very soon after, and I thought, well, I better tell him about this.
mm,
What's the what's the deal? And he was very blasé about it.
mm.
It was oh yeah, that's Charles Bonnet syndrome. You don't want to worry about that.
Oh, no.
And of course, then I
Yeah.
went back. Then I came back and I did the research on Charles Bonnet syndrome and found out that it's actually very common for people to have uh, this syndrome. And most people are terrified of it.
Mm,
Most people, some people do see fairies, describe them as fairies, but other people will say, there's monsters,
yes.
children,
Mhm,
ghosts, white ladies, all sorts. And most people do not like it. They want to get rid of it. But whereas
mm,
this started happening regularly from
mhm.
that moment on. I was fascinated by it.
Yeah.
This is
Mhm,
this is wonderful. And It's not an hallucination. That's
Mm,
hallucination is just a reductionist way of, oh well, don't worry about it. It's just an hallucination. It's
mm.
not an hallucination. These beings are presence within the material reality when I experience them, and there's also audio. Sometimes, not always. Sometimes
That's
they seem to
interesting.
speak to me
Mm,
telepathically. That's the best way I can describe it. Um, and
mm,
so since 2016, this has happened regularly. Sometimes it will go months without happening, and then it might happen more regularly. You know, there's no regulation to it. It'll always happen when I'm on my own and when it's slightly dark circumstance. It never happens in broad daylight. It has to be during the evening when it's getting dark or when it's got dark and I have a light on.
okay.
Always, without exception, that's when it's happened. So, so, so I've been having regular, what you might call fairy experiences that I've
Mm,
almost come to take for granted. I hate to say that, but it's as soon as it's always preceded by this geometric patterning, and sometimes, in fact, more than half the times, that's all that happens, and it
mm.
stops and goes away. But sometimes it manifests into these beings, and which I can see peripherally, and very, as I say, have a very distinct presence in my material reality at the time, and those experiences never last long for long. Sorry, never last much longer than a minute or so.
Wow.
So that's it.
What do they do, these beings? Do they
They
walk or
they
dance or
they don't do much, Claire. To be perfectly honest, it's they'll there's a strut about them. It's
okay.
like they own the place. You know, it's just
Ah.
turn it. It's almost they turn up and say, "Here we are again," and sometimes they will seem to lose attention of me and
Mm.
just be they will sometimes walk around in a circle. Sometimes they're just jumping up on the armchair and jump back down again. Nothing, nothing that dynamic or meaningful. Um, uh, and, and when the telepathic communication first began, obviously, actually, I tried speaking to them, asking them questions. You know,
Mm.
where are you from? What are you doing here? To
As
which,
you would.
well, yeah, and and then I got no answer, and then I tried it telepathically. I got no answer. I've never got an answer from them, and what they will say to me is always very simple things like they sometimes they will say hello,
Mm.
and sometimes they will say stay calm. You know, get rid of the anxiety. Why are you so anxious? Don't worry about this. You know, just chill out. And 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 I've told this before. Actually, this is the second time. I can't remember if it was the second or third time. The first time, and that's the first time that I had the audio. The first thing that one of them said to me, very distinct male voice, by the way, um, and it said "Maintain la calma."
Oh,
Oh,
right.
what are you talking about? I don't know what you're saying. And it said it again, and that was it. And of course, right, once it had finished, I obviously, as you do, you go onto the internet, you Google maintain la calma, try and get the spelling right, variations of spellings, and I soon found out that it was Spanish for stay calm. Stay calm, don't worry about it. Maintain la calma. Um, that was the only time they've not spoken to me in English. Don't ask me the meaning behind that. I have no idea. But but as I say, it continues. This phenomenon continues for me, um, and yeah, I hate to say that I take it for granted, but it's just sometimes it's oh right, here we go again. So
So are they still visiting you now?
yes, there was a
Or,
period.
yeah.
There was a period from right at the beginning of this year, right up till recently, that it stopped happening, and I was
Yeah.
very disappointed with this.
Mm.
And I don't, why is this stopped? And then about 2 weeks ago, I was going through a period of quite high anxiety for various
Mm.
reasons. and it happened again. And sure enough, they're there. The numbers vary. Sometimes it can be, there's never just one. There's always two, three, four, five, six. And this time when they turned up, there were probably six, maybe seven of them, and they seemed smaller. And they were telling me to, relax. In fact, the word they used, this is going to sound slightly bonkers. The word they used was chillax.
Foxy.
Chillax. And oh, right,
Yeah.
thanks. And so I see it as, how do you explain it? There's obviously something non-material
Mm.
interacting with my consciousness,
Yeah.
which is especially peaked when I'm in an anxious state. Um, and so I see it that they're trying to help me. It's kind of a reminder that this material reality that you've got all of these stresses and anxieties about, it's just one reality. You don't need to worry about it too much. And, here we are, just to prove that there's a whole, outside the electromagnetic spectrum that we can see, there's a whole different reality. So don't worry about it too much. That's how I've come to see it. That might be a bit of a simplistic interpretation, but it's certainly that yeah, it certainly helps me. It's always helped me since it first happened in 2016.
Yeah. And that resonates with me, definitely. Um, that the challenges of life are, pull us very much into the material world. And it's almost like, I don't know what it is that gives certain people like yourself a sensitivity to accessing these other realms through whatever means, maybe, trauma that activates it. I've spoken to a few people that have had an accident or some life-changing thing that's happened that has opened them up
Yes.
to the reality. Um, Lost my thread now, but
Well, what you're just saying there,
Mm,
so the reason I lost my sight in my right eye was because I had an accident and there was an oxygen
right.
blockage to the
Mm,
the visual cortex.
mm,
That's what caused. So basically, I have some type of brain damage,
okay.
and I've always seen, following after someone like Aldous Huxley, who will see the brain as a transceiver of
Mm,
consciousness,
mm,
and ultimate reality. Our brains are transceiving it, because if our brains didn't transceive it, we would be totally overwhelmed and we wouldn't be able to exist in this material reality. So you have to narrow it down, and that's what your brain does. And if the brain gets damaged in some way, then perhaps under certain circumstances, one of the offshoots of that is that it will start allowing bits of the reality that we don't normally experience within
mm,
your experience at certain times. I hasten to add, I certainly don't consider myself as having any psychic ability, none at all. I know various psychics, and I'm nothing
mm,
like them. I'm not able to just, oh, right, I'm going to be psychic now and tune into something. This kind of happens to me accidentally. And I
mm,
think that the damage to the brain and my eyesight is definitely something to do with it, because I never had a visual encounter with a fairy before it, apart from the 96 West Kennet
yeah.
experience. Whereas since 2016, I've had, multiple ongoing experiences. And as I say, I think that's because the brain, the damage to the brain at certain times puts me in an automatic altered state of consciousness, where I'm just able to just open up and see the reality that is all around us. And that
Yeah.
that goes,
Mm,
I think that's the fundamental of what the fairies are. I'm not going
mm,
to answer what the fairies are. No one knows what the fairies really are, but I think that ultimately whatever they are, whatever kind of life form they are, and I believe that they're a non-material life form.
Mhm.
And under certain circumstances, if you're in an altered state of consciousness, for whatever reason, for many reasons, their energy can manifest in our reality. And it's quite clear from the folklore for hundreds of years, you could even say thousands of years, um, that there's a consistency in fairy type entities. I know there's many types of different fairies, but there is a consistency among them. The way they're described in the Middle Ages is very similar than how they're described in the 21st century in many cases. And that tells me that they're doing that on purpose. That's how they manifest to us for whatever reasons. But that's so, yeah.
I did a little workshop a couple of years ago, and I learned something from that I didn't know before that relates to your, or might relate to the way that you're seeing fairies. Um, the woman that was leading the course said that we all have certain times in the course of the day where we slip into that mode of clairvoyant seeing,
Yeah.
and it's often precursed by seeing geometric patterns.
Mm, very interesting.
And for me, it's usually in the early hours of the morning if I wake up from a dream.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can see those geometric patterns in front of my eyes before I come into reality,
Yeah.
waking reality. Um, but is that part of Charles Bonnet syndrome, or is that something separate?
Both. I mean,
Both.
it happens to me probably because of Charles Bonnet syndrome, but I've heard many other people talk about an instance before some kind of numinous paranormal activity where there will be, they don't always say geometric patterns, they might say sort of smoke or just some, how best to describe it, some fault line in our visual record of
Yeah.
the world.
Mhm.
And sometimes, as for me, that's it. It comes, it goes, that's it. Whereas other times something will manifest. The most obvious one is the UFO phenomenon, where people describing seeing UFOs will say, a portal opened, or there was geometric pattern, or there was some smoke or a blue light before the actual UFO appeared. And I have seen UFOs on various occasions. Nothing spectacular, but fast-moving lights in the sky, and they, sure enough, are always preceded by some kind of patterning in the sky, and then boom, 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 this amazing light is moving in the far distance. So there's something in it. What is that? Is that just a crack in reality? That's how it manifests before
Mm.
something else happens. I think there's good reason to think that. Um, why that would be, I don't know. Maybe the geometric pattern is the energy, is the non-material life form, and then our cultural perceptions, our predispositions,
Mhm.
see what we see as fairy type entities, ghosts, UFOs, whatever that might be. That's kind of predisposition. I mean, that's only an interpretation. I'm not saying that's the truth, but it seems reasonable to go along that line of thinking, I think.
Do you have any idea or thoughts about why these beings are coming to you?
I think, well, they've been doing it for a long time, not just
Yeah,
me. I mean, in general, this has been happening. So why would that happen throughout human history?
yeah.
Um, I think they're I think they're well, if they exist in their own standalone reality, they may have things to do that have nothing to do with humanity. But the fact that they keep coming into human culture, human society, suggests that they do have something to do with humanity. And um, well, for me, it's helping me. You listen to other fairy stories, and they can be not very nice characters, can they? They can be
Yeah.
malicious little things, and maybe that's to teach us a lesson. But I guess you could say the bigger lesson, as with anything that takes us outside of our normal everyday material reality, is that the lesson is that um, our existence, our everyday material existence, is not all there is.
Mm.
There is more to us as beings than the everyday. You could compare it to something like a near-death experience, where you see this all the time, don't you? With people who
Yeah.
have had NDEs,
Hmm.
they might have been, going on with their lives. They might have been very afraid of death. They have the NDE, and oh, everything's okay. You don't need
Yeah.
to worry about it. I've overcome
Hmm.
my fear of death. That's it. You could even say this about dreams, in that dreams are a clue that have been given to us by the universal consciousness, God, whatever you want to call it. They're a clue about transcendence. So you
Mm.
wake up from the dream that you think, your avatar in the dream thinks everything in it is real. This is real life. And then you transcend from the dream and you become you. And that's a clue of what happens to us when we die. We transcend from what we think is the everyday reality. So going back to fairies, they're just one part in this. I'm very much a believer in. I very rarely use the word God because it has too many connotations. But whatever, a designer,
Hmm.
something has designed how we are, and it's you could even say simulated. I know lots of people have problems with simulation theory, but let's just say this has been simulated, and the simulator, whoever or whatever it is, has put in a series of clues into this reality we're living, and fairy type entities turning up at strange times and doing strange things are one of those clues. That's those are I'm always wrestling with these thoughts, and I try to put them into the blog posts. And sometimes I think, no, I've come to a dead end on this one. But that thought about them being a clue to our overall reality has been consistent in my
Yeah.
thinking. I think there's definitely something in that.
And so, is there, because these beings have followed you from Somerset to where you are now,
Mm,
is there then, because often we started off talking about sites, didn't we, and how
yeah.
these beings are being connected to sites, but it seems that they can travel. There's some element of non-locality with them.
No, that's a good word.
Yeah.
That is a very good term, non-locality. In that they, I think, connect themselves to consciousness.
Mm.
They're more interested in attaching themselves to certain human consciousnesses than they are places. The reason they turn up so often at places, like specifically prehistoric monuments, is because I'm pretty sure our ancestors were experiencing them regularly, and the monuments that they erected were in part to realize the specialness of that part of the landscape.
Mhm.
Maybe for a variety of reasons, that they would put up these kind of monuments. But if our prehistoric, Neolithic, Bronze Age ancestors were having regular experiences with these non-human intelligent entities, they've
Mm.
been marking the spots where it happened. And that's why those spots are imbued with a specialness, and there's so much folklore attached to it. But but you're right. In my own personal experience, the beings that turn up here, where I am now in Liverpool, are exactly the same as
Mm.
the ones in Somerset. There's no difference between them. They don't have a Scouse accent. I can assure you. And so I'm presuming that they've latched on to my consciousness for whatever reason,
Yeah.
and for them. as you say, it's non-local. The locality is irrelevant. And you think if if entities, non-material entities, are operating in different part of the electromagnetic spectrum, then it's going to make very little difference in what we think of as geographical space to where they can and can't turn up. So yeah.
Yeah. So those, like, yeah, that's a great way to think about it, that we're just marking, those places are just markers in the landscape of
Yes.
places where those experiences have been had by
Yes.
people all over time.
Yes. There's his name's just gone from me, but very famous guy whose name has gone from me. But the point is that he's written a couple of books where he talks about earth acupuncture, and he's talking especially about stone circles
Mhm.
and individual stones that have been put into the earth in the Neolithic and early Bronze Age, and he's talking about them, in the sense of doing acupuncture for the landscape. They found a special place, they've had experiences there, and so they mark it with stones, as in the same way as a needle would go into you in special places around the body, and they would have seen the landscape as a body, as a mother or whatever, and that's another. Why am I talking about that? Earth acupuncture. Yeah, no, that's and I, oh,
Yeah.
it's bothering me. You know, when you come on podcast
Yeah,
and so a name will just go from you,
I
and then
know. I know
as soon as we log
what
off, it'll be straight into my head.
you're saying.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. If you remember it, send it to me and I'll put it in the notes or
Yeah,
something
good.
for
Yeah,
the
good.
episode. Yeah, I mean, time's going on, but I did want to hear about one of your auditory experiences.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's talk about the one that you had when you were wild camping. Okay.
Yeah, well, there are two, because
Yeah.
I realise I've said I've only had one experience before
Yeah.
20 to 2016, but there was another auditory only experience, and then one very recently last year, and they're very, very similar. So I'll just quickly, I know I don't want to go over time with you, Claire, but I'll just quickly talk
Yeah.
about these two
Sure.
experiences. So the first one, um, this was in 1996 again, and it was on names Langdon Wood in Dorset, which is near a place called Golden Cap, which is a very
Yeah.
famous
Mhm.
outcrop on the beautiful Dorset coast path.
Mm.
And if you just go inland from less than a mile, maybe a kilometre, whatever, from Golden Cap, you come to a place called Langdon Wood.
Mm.
And in 1996, again, this was after the West Kennet um, experience,
Mhm.
and I'd been wild camping for 3 days. This was the last day that I had to find a place to camp. So I went into Langdon Wood, close to twilight, set up the camp, made sure away from any paths, right in the middle of the woods, so you don't get disturbed. Those of you know who have done wild camping, you pitch up when it's getting dark, you
Mhm.
eat your food, you go to sleep, and then when it gets light again, you're off and you don't leave any trace. No one will know you've been there. So that's what I did, and I was asleep by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I only know this because I kept a journal at the time, so I'm not doing this from memory. So I just keep a journal of my wild camps in those days. And 3 o'clock in the morning, I got up, and there was sound of very distant voices, and they were coming closer to me.
Mhm.
Very unusual, two female voices, and they're coming closer, closer, closer. I'm lying in the tent, wide awake again. I was not dreaming this. This is very visceral. I'm awake, and the voices came very close to the tent, but didn't stop. Just kept on going, and walked past me. The voices were two females, and they were speaking a language that I did not understand.
Mhm.
If they'd have been speaking French or Spanish, Italian, German, even, I'd have got a few words. All right, okay. but I did not understand it at all. That this language that they're speaking very quickly, sort of gabbling to each other, and they went straight past my tent and way and way and way, and then out of earshot. Now, middle of a wood in at 3 o'clock in the morning,
Mm.
two women on their own. It's unlikely, isn't it?
Yeah, it
It's an
is. Yeah.
unlikely experience. The only thing I did find out afterwards is that Langdon Wood does have a bit of a reputation for a coven in Langdon Wood. And when I found that out, I thought, could there have been, a coven meeting? They might meet at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's possible, but I still think that because there's nowhere near a footpath, would you go to a coven meeting and then just walk through the middle of the woodlands and you're not English, you're not, you're speaking this complete language. It doesn't make sense, does it? And I'd never made sense of that. It was, I wrote it all down in my journal and always just thought of it as a very strange experience. And only later did I think, was that a fairy experience? Maybe not. That I should also add that there is a tradition in Langdon Wood of something called whistling down the fairies, where you're supposed to
Okay.
whistle
Yeah.
and the fairies will whistle back at you.
Oh,
And
interesting.
that tradition has been around since the 19th century. So there is that. It's obviously a special place. Maybe one day I'll go back and wild camp there again to see what happens. So that was as I say, it was an audio experience. I stayed in my tent all the time until the sounds went away. Then I got out of the tent, and all right, and I didn't get back to sleep that night. And again, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't
No.
particularly afraid. It was just, wow, this is fascinating. What was going on?
Yeah.
This is amazing. And then a very similar experience happened only last year in October in Glastonbury. Now I'm very familiar with Glastonbury. I lived there for a year. Been visiting since 1989. I know the place inside out. And I was there with Kate Ray and Joe Hickey Hall, and your good self came along to the fairy fair.
Oh, yes, I came to see your talk that you
That's
did.
right. That's right.
Yes, I did.
And so there's a fairy
Mm.
fair there in the end, 20th of October, something like that.
Hmm.
And Kate, Joe, and I were giving a talk, and we did that. And then there's the fairy ball on the Saturday evening,
Yeah.
and Kate and Joe dressed up as in the fairy gear, and off they went to the ball. But I don't dress up in fairy gear, Claire, no, so I don't do that. So I stomped off up Glastonbury Tor,
Hmm.
and this is the odd thing. It's Saturday night. It's 10 o'clock. It's dry. The weather's okay for the end of October. And I start walking up Glastonbury from the town side, the long way up, and I did not see a single person walking up. That's very unusual.
It is
I,
unusual. Yeah.
I've been up Glastonbury Tor hundreds of times, and I've never been up there on my own,
Mm.
um, and certainly not even passing anyone up the path. So I walk up the path, get to the top, and there's no one there. No one at the top of Glastonbury Tor on a Saturday night. That's wow. That's unusual. So I sit down facing the west by the tower, and that was great. And for 20 minutes, no one came up at all. And then after 20 minutes, I hear voices, and I think, okay, fair enough. They're coming up the other side. They're coming up the other side from the other side of the short way up,
Mm.
and it's two males and a female. And again, I soon realised they're speaking a language I can't understand.
Mm.
Just and gabbling, real gabbling to it.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there at the west thinking, okay, they're going. They seem to be going through the tower, the base of the tower. I better get up, and so I don't surprise them when they come round, and give them a shock that there's someone else up here sitting by the
Mm.
tower. So I get up and walk round, and as I'm walking round, the voices stop, and I come round the tower, and there's no one there.
Wow.
And I walk, I
Yeah.
walk around the tower, look down the paths. There's no way three people could have got there and just disappeared without me seeing them. I'd have seen them somewhere. And I stayed there for about 15 minutes, looking around, thinking, what, trying to come up with some rational explanation for this. And this is bizarre. Why is this? What is this? That's very strange experience. And again, what was that? What is that, a fairy type incident? Possibly. I can't think of any rational explanation for it. Some
No.
three people turned up. They were talking in a foreign language that I didn't understand, and then in an instant, those sounds were gone. I didn't see anything at any point, and it doesn't make sense. And it was only later in the day, or later the next day, that the Langdon Hill experience came back to me, and I thought that's a very similar experience. You know, the foreign language, the not actually seeing them, very straight. So there you go. There's my two experiences. What, nearly 30 years apart. Um, and I still I can't say, well, what does it mean? What does it mean? I don't know. It's just, maybe we can come back to it being just an experience that happens to you to tell you that there is more to this world than
Mm,
that we would be led to believe by materialist reductionists.
yeah, because I mean, what was happening at that time? Did it draw you back into that state of, oh, there is more to reality? Have you?
Possibly, but I'd already sort of
Yeah.
been, I was already there anyway. The only thing I can think of in terms of altering my state of consciousness, I mean, in the tent in
Mm,
1996, it would have been a kind of on high alert. You're in a
mm,
tent in a wood. You don't want other people turning up at 3 o'clock in the
no.
morning. So you're on a state of high alert. In Glastonbury last year, I'd been hanging out with Kate, Joe, and Rob Wildwood uh, for at the pub
Mm,
for before they went to the fairy fair, and it was all very convivial. You're with friends, everything's great, and then suddenly they disappeared. And as I I decided to go up Glastonbury tour, and I was stomping up there. I was in quite a depressed state of mind. It was kind of, oh, here I am alone again. And so that's the only slight altered state of consciousness that might have invoked that type of experience.
it's interesting that you were with three other people and then you encountered three other people, which you didn't
I
see.
think Joe pointed that out when I spoke to her. Yeah, obviously that it's mixed because it was up the tour. It was two males and a female, whereas there it was two females and a male.
Yeah,
That could be something. I'm not sure what. I can't reach
yeah.
an interpretation of that, but that there could be something in that. Yeah.
And the gabbling as well. It's quite often said that fairies are heard chattering.
Yes.
No.
Yes. That's one of the main reasons why I wrote an article about this in on Dead But Dreaming, and that's one of the reasons why I cautiously interpret it as a fairy type experience, even though I saw nothing. There was no visual evidence.
Mm. Thank you, Neil, for sharing your experiences.
That's all right. I
Yeah.
hope people, I I'm always very interested when people when I share these experiences for other people to say, "Oh, I've had something really similar to that," and that always interests me, and I always ask for that on the blog site. If I've written about this, please do get in touch with me. If
Yes. So where can people contact you?
The easiest thing to do is go on Dead But Dreaming. All you need to do, if you just put Dead But Dreaming
Mm.
on into a search engine, it'll be either first, second, or third, and you'll find my contact details there, my email. Anyway, and I'm always happy to hear from anyone who's interested in the who is interested in the phenomenon.
Brilliant. And what's next for you, Neil? Are you going to
Well,
do another podcast with Kate soon, or?
yeah, that's the other thing I do. As you said at the beginning, I do podcasts on Hare and the Hawthorn with Kate Ray.
Mm.
We've got a few guests lined up. We've got David Halpin, great Irish
Oh,
folklorist,
wow.
lined up,
Yeah.
and Joshua Cutchin from America
Mm.
lined up. And I think Kate's got another couple people who I can't remember, and sometimes Kate and I just do it by ourselves if we've got a subject that we want to talk about. But we'll be carrying on. It goes in ebbs and flows. You know what it's like, Claire, doing a podcast.
Yeah,
Sometimes life gets in the way, and you don't do
definitely.
anything for a month, and then suddenly you've got you do two or three in quick succession. So I'll be doing that, and I'll be continuing to write blog posts, and the my because I'm also a novelist, so I've published 2 novels. The second, which confusingly is called Dead But Dreaming. Hold on, I've got to show you this, Claire. Sorry, I know we're running out of time, but
No, that's fine.
so the second novel is Dead
Fantastic.
Dead But Dreaming,
Yeah.
which
Mhm.
is, well, I won't give you a description. But there's lots of fairies in it. It's not a fantasy novel. It's set in 1970 in a psychiatric hospital, and the fairies play a large part in that book. So I'm putting together the ideas for a third novel now. I don't. I'm always cautious about saying this because, oh yeah, I'm going to write a third novel, but at the moment I'm thinking about it. I'm putting the puzzle pieces together. So it's I don't know when that'll be written, when it'll be published, but that's what I need to concentrate on in the next couple of years, maybe.
Exciting. Thank you ever so much for your time. It's been brilliant speaking to you.
Absolute pleasure, Claire.
Yeah, and hope to catch up with you again sometime soon. So
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. Cheers.
take care. Bye.